My wife and I are from Culiacán, Sinaloa. A few years ago, we went to live in Guadalajara, since a brother of mine suggested to me that I would earn more money there, so we left everything here. We spent a year in the house that my brother rented in Tlaquepaque, and there, very curious things happened to us. For example, often we heard little footsteps and laughter, like children's, and sometimes we heard marbles falling down the stairs, as if they were bouncing step by step until they reached the floor. On some occasions, we even saw them. Even some reached the street, since the stairs were in front of the entrance door, and from down there was nothing to stop them. Besides that, the door was a little separated from the floor. Almost every night was the same. But from then on, we never saw anything in that house. However, the strangest things happened to me aboard my trailer. After that year in Guadalajara, we moved to Manzanillo. We lived there for 4 years. During vacations, I would take my wife and children with me on trips. And that's how together we almost got to know the entire Mexican Republic. On one occasion I had to make a trip to Culiacán, and I told my wife that if she wanted to accompany me, so that I could take advantage and see her family, she agreed to come with me, since it would be a quick trip. When we arrived in Culiacán, I left my wife and my children with their family, and I went to deliver the merchandise that I brought with me. After finishing my delivery, I looked for a place to park the boxes in what was going for my wife. By doing this, it was a bit complicated for me to maneuver to park, since I had a double full box trailer. But fortunately, behind the only tree that was in that place, a man came out, who very kindly made me signs with his hands to help me park and unhook the boxes. When I finished maneuvering, I got out of the cabin to thank him for such opportune help, but I couldn't find him anywhere. I don't remember seeing his face, but I remember well that through the mirrors I saw that he was wearing blue marine mesh pants and a square shirt. But none of the men that were around dressed like that, besides me getting off the trailer quickly. The man couldn't have made much progress in case he had walked. But well, I no longer gave it any importance, and I returned to the cabin to go for my children and my wife. After having picked them up, I returned to the winery to hook up the boxes and start our return to Manzanillo. When I got to the place, it was already completely dark, because it was already night, and only illuminated the few lamps that were in the place. Days ago, some vandals tried to steal my wiring, and I did not bring lights to the back, but to the pure intermittents, so I asked my wife to help me with making signs to be able to hook the boxes faster, and also to support me stopping the traffic that could pass through there to avoid a possible accident. When I was looking around to get ready, I noticed my wife a little strange. I don't know, as if she was looking for someone or was afraid of something. When I finished hooking the boxes, she went up to the cabin to get us out. I asked her if something was wrong. She, a little confused and surprised, told me that when she was behind the second box, in the tree, she saw a very strange man who was standing there. She said that man was standing, but the strange thing is that she could not distinguish him from anything else beyond the shoulders, and he couldn't see his face either. He says he was very scared, because everything was very alone, and maybe it was someone who wanted to assault us, because there was no one else close at that moment. He was being taken care of everywhere, but he said that when he turned back to where that man was, there was no one. He didn't know where he went, and all around us there was absolutely no one, because the wineries were already closed, and it is not a place for anything to be seen at night. When he told me this, I asked him if he could see how that man was dressed, and gave me exactly the same description of the man I saw in the afternoon, blue marine blouse and square shirt. I remained silent. She asked me why my sudden silence, and I only answered that that seemed very curious to me. The description she gave me of that man fit perfectly with that of that man who that same afternoon had helped me park the trailer. And that also, from one moment to another, I lost track of him completely. But, in total, only something strange happened to us and we didn't give him any more importance. We started the return and our trip went without any more news. When I returned to my base in Manzanillo, for my misfortune, they told me that I had to urgently return to Culiacán to make another delivery, just in the same warehouse where I had just arrived. I asked my wife if she wanted to come back with me back to Culiacán to accompany me, but she told me that I could no longer do it, because the children would have to attend school the next day, and I didn't want them to miss class. She asked me to stay with them, that it was a very long trip and I hadn't rested at all. I told her that we couldn't afford to let go of that money that they would pay me for the trip, but that she wouldn't worry. I promised her that when I got to Guadalajara, I would stop to rest and to lie down a little to replenish my energy. Also, they told me that it was urgent to deliver that merchandise, which was scheduled for another trailer to be taken, but for some reasons it could not come out, so I would have to return to Culiacán to deliver the rest of that order. And so it was. I only undertook my return. Everything was going well. In fact, when I arrived in Guadalajara, I didn't feel so tired, so I followed myself all the way to Sinaloa. But when I arrived at San Marcos's house in Mazatlán, almost to enter Culiacán, I felt that my eyes were closing, for so many hours driving without sleeping, and also in the morning sun hitting my face directly. Not knowing exactly when it happened, I fell asleep on the steering wheel. But suddenly I heard a voice screaming to me, "Alonso! Alonso! Alonso, wake up!" At that moment, with a huge weight on my eyelids, I turned to my right side, to the seat of the co-pilot from where that voice that shouted my name came from. It was a great surprise for me when I saw, sitting next to me, the man in blue skirt and square shirt. From the astonishment, I woke up completely, and looking ahead, the toll booth was very close to me. I was going directly to crash into it, but fortunately, I managed to brake hard, thus saving my life and that of all the people who were there, who were shouting and running, fleeing in terror from that accident that seemed certain to happen. Once I was already calming down from that horrible scare that I went through, I reacted and remembered that man who appeared to me. There is no doubt. It was exactly the same man who manifested himself to my wife and me in the wineries. However, no matter how much I turn my head, I can't remember the face of that man. I don't know who it is. But I am so grateful that he had woken me up. God bless me, he could wake me up on time and thus avoid a tragedy. Another very strange event that happened to me. It was on an occasion that I was going to Tehuacan, Puebla. I had to go by Marmol to the quarry that is over there. Night came when I was on the road. I was still very overwhelmed by the previous time that I almost crashed into the highway. And to avoid going through something like that again, I decided to better lie down and rest. At that time, it was the first time I was going that way from Mexico. I still didn't know that part of the country. I didn't want to risk moving further to look for a hotel, so better. I looked for a safe place to park the trailer. After doing this, I went to bed in the bunk. I was extremely cold, and I put both blankets I had on top of me to warm up. In the early morning, around 4 o'clock, the cold woke me up. I was so cold that it felt as if I had no blankets on, so I sat up to cover myself better. But to my great surprise, I only had one blanket on, the other was folded and arranged in its place. It looked as if someone had already gotten up and put it away, but it was impossible, absurd. I was completely alone and I remember perfectly well having covered myself with both blankets. However, that was not the worst. My biggest scare was when I realized that the whole cabin was impregnated with a cigarette smell, as if someone had just smoked. It was impossible for that smell to come from outside, because everything was perfectly closed and also, I don't smoke, so it was impossible for it to have been impregnated because of me. Things were very strange since that trip to Manzanillo. Things happened to me as if I was always accompanied by someone. And in fact, I think I confirmed it in this next story that I will tell you. On that occasion, it was a trip in which we were going 2 trailers together to deliver a merchandise, which was very expensive, so we would take a car to guard us all the time during the journey. Every certain kilometer these cars were taken. The next one on the road was waiting for us, and the one who came with us was returning to his base. When night fell, we decided to stop at a booth and went to a small restaurant that was there to have dinner and have coffee. We were in that when one of the guards approached me and said, "Hey, take a coffee with cookies to your partner." "Which partner? What do you mean, which?" "To your partner, your co-pilot." "I don't bring anyone, I come alone. I've been smoking in the cabin for a while, I even saw the smoke of the cigarette." "Come on, don't be mean and bring him something." "No, we came alone. We're not accompanied. Ask the driver of the other trailer." He approached the driver and asked if it was true that we were traveling alone. He answered yes, that it was just one of us in each cabin. The guard fell silent and looked at us. With a lot of disbelief. "No, I really don't believe them." "Seriously? In fact, let's go so you can see." And we all came closer to my trailer. We were the two guards, the driver of the other trailer, and me. When I opened the cabin door, I told the guard, "There it is, get on so you can see." Logically, there was no one, but that penetrating cigarette smell was very present like last time, so the guard made me the observation of that and told me what happened. "You see, if there was someone here, I tell you that I saw him smoking, he must have gone down and you are kidding me." At that moment, I remembered what happened to me last time I was going to Puebla. We stayed a while before talking about paranormal things, and I told you these experiences that I just told you. After everything that happened, I think there is no doubt that there is someone who always accompanies me when I travel. I'm not afraid of him, because I don't think it's a bad presence. In fact, I think he's a good travel companion. How do I know? Well, he saved my life once. After other trips to Culiacán, Puebla, and other destinations, my sons and I went on a trip with Alonso, my husband. On one occasion, we accompanied him to pick up some containers at the port of Manzanillo. We waited a long time for him outside. He told us it would take a long time to get out, because the documents of the merchandise were wrong, and the customs would not allow them to load the containers onto the platforms like that. It got to the time that the offices closed, but my husband did not appear anywhere, and we had been waiting for him for almost 2 hours, when suddenly a colleague of my husband, who was nicknamed El Charro, came out, who was also waiting for the trailer to be loaded. And he said to me, "Ah, hello, ma'am. Call Rosalia. Alonso is already loaded on the platforms." I thanked him for the warning and then said goodbye. 15 minutes later, my husband finally left the customs, and he already brought the containers loaded on the platforms. My children and I went up to the cabin to finally leave the port. Several hours passed, and to tell you the truth, everything was very quiet. Or at least for me, since at a certain point, I noticed that Alonso was very restless. He looked very nervous. To make him talk, told him that I had seen his friend the Charro, and his reaction caught my attention, since he only turned to me for a moment and continued with a fixed look to the front. He did not answer me anything. I asked him what was going on. He answered me nothing. I told him I knew he had something on his mind, that he would tell me what was going on, and he answered me, "Do you remember the last trip I made to Guadalajara?" Well, the Charro decided to accompany me, since it would only be an entry-exit trip, and also, his trailer was stopped in the workshop, waiting to be repaired. We were on the road at dawn. Naturally, everything was very dark. The only thing we saw was the path illuminated by the lights of the trailer. We were talking and joking, when suddenly, inside the cabin, we heard the classic sound of a civilian band radio turn on and look for signal. That made me amazed. Why? Because I don't bring with me any radio in the cabin. And the Charro also knew. That sound continued to be heard until it seemed to have found a signal. And suddenly a voice was heard, with a lot of interference. Here you are listening in short frequency from the road. Someone is listening. As a joke, smiling, the Charo answered as if he had the microphone in his hand. 1098, here the Charo listens to you. 1051, change. Then he laughed, punching me with his fist slightly in the shoulder. That was good, huh? Now get the radio. Where did you hide it? But I was surprised because I wasn't playing a joke or anything like that. It was true that we didn't have any radio. Then we heard that sound again. I got terrified when that voice answered him asking for our location. I heard him loud and clear. I'm a friend of Ruta. I'm a friend of Ruta. Change. My friend was laughing, looking everywhere for the radio that he thought I had hidden. Come on, Alonso. Tell me where you have the radio. Yes, this is Bay 5. I repeat, 10 to 75. Here is a company of fruit, 10 to 69, change. My partner, laughing, made the same gesture with his hand, as if he were holding the microphone, and then he answered that we were going to Guadalajara. He then asked where he was heading. It should be clarified that all this happened while the Charo was still laughing, looking for the supposed radio that I had hidden. 1076, Guadalajara, Route 150, 1020, change. On my part, I was more than scared, although for a moment I thought it was all a joke. On the contrary, at some point when I didn't realize it, the Charo hid inside my trailer a radio, and it was he who was playing a joke on me. I quickly told the Charo what I was thinking, but he said no, that he had done nothing. Finally, we both convinced ourselves that it was neither one nor the other who was joking, because certainly he and I got on the trailer at the same time, and I, for my part, explained that I do not use radio, that I only use my cell phone to communicate. I remember that I leaned over and even turned on the lights inside the cabin to prove to him that I had no equipment with which to transmit. And at that moment, we got an answer that scared both of us. 10 to 4, 10 to 76, the border, copy. That meant that mysterious man was in Chihuahua, heading towards the border. Something totally impossible because being like that, it was not possible for him to be able to talk to us from a distance. Because easy, we were more than 800 kilometers from each other, and the civilian radio stations don't have that range. If they can transmit and receive messages at a maximum of 15 kilometers, or 30 maybe, with the most powerful equipment, and in open field. For that moment, my partner and I were scared, and he no longer joked about answering. We remained silent for a few minutes to see if we received an answer, but the phenomenon did not repeat itself again, so we resumed our journey. And so it was that time. We did not know where that voice or the sounds of the radio came from. We reached our destination and returned on the same route without any problem. And that transmission, it was like a mystery to us. After Alonso told me that, I was very disconcerted, but I didn't understand why he was so restless and so nervous, so I asked him again, and he answered me that a while ago, I had heard again in the cabin, that characteristic sound of the civil band radio, turn on. But for not scaring me, he had not told me anything, since I could not perceive it, and of course, he was not going to answer that mysterious voice. I must confess that I was a little scared when he told me that. Minutes later, we arrived at a gas station. He got off the trailer to charge diesel, and I stayed in the cabin with my children. I went to lie down for a moment on the bed of the bedside table, when I suddenly felt that they threw my right leg down the bed. Out of fear, I got up and screamed. My daughter, who was in the front seat on the co-pilot's side, had her brother on her lap, and I was alone, lying down. There was no way they could have kicked or grabbed my leg since I was far from them. I didn't say anything to my daughter, but when Alonso got in, I told him what had happened. And he laughed and said to me, "Well, you're disturbing my co-pilot, don't you see that he's sleeping there?" And I, a little disconcerted, sat down. We returned to the road again. On the way, the children fell asleep, and I went to sit down with him to talk to him. We were talking in our conversations when suddenly, a radio was heard on, but this time, I could hear it too. Alonso remained silent. By his expression, I knew it was the same sound he had heard before, and I told him, that sound seemed as if he were looking for a frequency. I stayed on the lookout to see if I could distinguish something. Suddenly, we heard a man's voice, between much interference. Alonso said, "Pay attention to what he says." At first he was very unintelligible, but little by little he became clearer. "Help, please. Can someone hear me? Help, help, please. Can someone hear me?" He repeated this several times. Alonso said that that voice was exactly the same that he had been talking about that time with the charro, but this time, he sounded desperate and very distressed. It was as if he was trapped inside somewhere. And suddenly, someone responded to his call. Between the messages, we realized that the man who had been asking for help had had a serious accident. The person who responded asked for his location. And that voice answered him. I do not remember the kilometer, but he said he was in the state of Chihuahua, and we knew that the person who answered him was a friend of his because he told him, no, compadre, yes. Until I arrived. This boss forced me to go like this with the car. They didn't finish checking the brakes well, I went further. I love my family. Tell me that I love you very much. No, compadre, don't say that, please. I'm still going fast. It was the police and the ambulance. I'm almost there. Please, comrade, wait. Wait. After that, the transmission was cut off. It was all we heard. We couldn't understand how it was possible for a phenomenon to occur like that. I repeat that we didn't even have a radio. We didn't find the logic to this. We kept trying to explain this to ourselves, but we couldn't. So, in the end, we decided to pray for the rest of that poor soul. The rest of the journey went normally. Alonso told me that when he returned, he would ask for reports of the trailer that he was driving. He knew that when he was assigned, it was already used, and he was looking for who had been the previous driver. Maybe he could know the reason for everything that was happening. When he got to the base, he talked to his boss and asked him who had driven that trailer before him, to which he replied that he did not know, that he bought the cabin in a gutter. It was very damaged because they had crashed into it. However, it was at a very good price and he acquired it, repaired it, and since he is the owner, Alonso was the only one who had been assigned to her. With this, it was more than clear that his boss had acquired the cabin without knowing that someone had died in it. However, this seemed not to matter to him. There are many people who do not want appearances or souls in pain. However, this story does not end here, because a few days after that, my husband checked the engine for some details that it had. He was taken by a huge surprise, and in fact, it is not yet explained how a ticket for a ticket to a state casino in Chihuahua was stuck there among the metals. The exact date was no longer legible, but the year was distinguishable. It was 1998, and the time it was printed was at 1 in the morning. Curiously, at that time, minutes more, minutes less, was when we heard that call for help in the cabin. Perhaps that is why that man always accompanies my husband, to take care of him and prevent him from having the same fate. May that soul in pain rest in peace, and may God accompany all the drivers who go out to drive on the highways to provide for their families, without having the certainty that they will return to see them.